Okay, everybody, this is Douglas Ehninger, part 2 of Douglas Ehninger's amazing essay about argument and coercion and argument as a method. So, argument as a method, what do we think that is? What is a method? We haven't even really talked about this. So, maybe in part 2, we can start by talking about what a method is and what a method might be for somebody like Douglas Ehninger. A method is a way of doing things. A process might be kind of like a method, but it's a way of doing something. And so his definition of argumentation, it seems to me, is a method of correction that is superior to the other methods of correction out there because it's involved joint risk, bilaterality, conviction, and emotion, and there's high stakes involved. But what we want is assent. We want assent. Oh, I just got an email. Close that. What we want is assent of and from, and we want assent from the people who are trying to change their mind or get them to change their mind. We can't do it. They have to change their mind on their own. That's what he's saying. That's the highest level of ethics. That's the highest level of ethical argumentation. So, let's do the second part of this essay and see how far we can get in a half an hour. So now comes the part where he's saying, okay, there might be some limitations to argument. There might be some things that are wrong with it. So we talked about that a little bit in the last one of like what might be the limits of argument. So the first one is that it's indecisive. Yeah, I can't decide where to start. Ha 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 ha. So with the first one, what he's talking about, as I concluded the last video, is that he's talking about the basic rules of engagement and argument in democratic orders. If you want to change how things are done, you have the burden of proof. The burden of proof means that you need to have compelling, sufficient, good evidence and reasons to change what we're doing. The other side has what we call presumption, which means they're not going to change their ways unless they see a reason to change it, and they're going to push back against that because it's always expensive and time-consuming to change what we do. Then, if the prima facie case is met, argumentation theorists would say the opposite side, often called the negative, or the status quo sometimes, the way things are right now, the present system, would have the burden of rejoinder. They have to argue back why their system or way of doing things is better anyway, even in the face of all this stuff. Okay, so such counteraction, however, merely arouses the protagonist to new efforts. Now it is he who must enter into the developing dispute additional probative elements capable of raising his cause above the obstructions introduced by his opponent. And so the interchange continues, each party alternately arousing himself as a result of action by the other in a series of moves and countermoves, the specific nature of which is determined by the history of the controversy itself. So argument goes on and on, like I was saying before, that it's usually not stopped because argument finds a natural stopping place. There's always a response. It's usually stopped because of time or obligation or frustration or exhaustion. Moreover, so far as argument as method is concerned, no one of the foregoing moves or countermoves is decisive in that it leaves the opposing party without an opportunity to answer. That's what I just said, Doug. Come on, man, get with the program. The answer that is made may be strong or weak, irrelevant or relevant. This, however, will be determined not by the resources of argument as such, but by the weight of the evidence with which the answer is supported and the acuteness of the disputant in directing his remarks to the point in question. So, argument's not going to determine the standards for argument. It's going to be determined by the participants. That's huge. This is very much anti-philosophy, like Tolman was too. The standards don't come from argument itself. It comes from the people doing it. Those answers will always be there, but it's up to the audience to determine if they're strong or good or relevant. That's huge. Because a party to an argument can be beaten into submission neither by the stick of fact nor by the stick of formal demonstration, argument as a process theoretically is interminable. That means there is no end. So if you're talking about the meaning of a poem, that makes a lot of sense. There would never be a point where you'd say, we got it. But what if you're talking about foreign policy or how many aircraft carriers we should have or whether or not we should have nuclear weapons? Isn't there a point where we would not have argument anymore? We'd know. An argument that comes up every once in a while is whether the United States should have used nuclear weapons against Japan. I think it's a good argument to get into to practice these skills, but that happened in 1946, 1948, something like that. You can see how bad my history is. 1948, I want to say. Prove me wrong, Internet. I'm sure there'll be some comment of like, Professor doesn't know anything. He got the date wrong. That's fine. I like these kind of YouTube comments. But that act of that happened a long time ago. We're still arguing about it. And I think it proves Ehninger's point is that even on these things that are huge and probably should have a clear solution, argument is interminable. It can go on forever. As long as we're following it as a method, the method he prescribes, it can go on forever. Arguments as acts end not because argument as a method has completed a natural cycle, because the resources or possibilities of argument itself have been exhausted. Instead, they terminate for reasons external to argument as method. I already covered this, right? All of the available evidence may have been exploited. We don't have any other facts. We got to go back to the library and get more evidence. The disputants may be wary of the fray or be called to some other activity. Changes in the environment may render obsolete the problem agitated. Hitherto overlooked or unknown facts may intervene to provide a mutually acceptable solution. A stipulated time limit may have expired. Presidential debate. If these or similar circumstances did not arise, however, arguments as acts could continue indefinitely, because some controversial subjects command an endlessly fresh and varied body of evidence, never weary the interest, and are immune to the intervention of facts. They are indeed perennial. You can probably think off the top of your head some topics that fit this perfectly. They fit this absolutely perfectly. Other topics you wish didn't. But most argument is interminable. It can go on forever. There's no solution to it. The parties can agree to end it. But there's also another thing he left out that I think is important here, is that the idea that since argument is bilateral and both people are committed to a kind of a method of looking at what deserves credence and what doesn't, and they're pushing and pulling on each other in this kind of movement, the argument itself can move into an area where both sides agree. They're like, oh, we're debating the wrong thing. We're arguing about the wrong thing. And then it gets solved because the environment or the situation. Actually, he might have said this, actually. Changes in the environment may render obsolete the problem agitated. That's what he means. He already said it. So that's exactly what I mean, is that as you're pushing back and forth, you realize, wait, we're arguing about the wrong thing. It's this, and we're actually in agreement. Okay, argument over. So it's not necessarily that argument has a prescribed end where someone wins. It can literally go on forever. We can still argue that Warren G. Harding should have not been president. He should have lost. His ideas were bad. We can pick that up, do the research, and have that today. That's what Ehninger's saying. Now, whether we'd want to or not is a question of what kind of arguments get attention. This is a question of rhetorical exigence. What things deserve rhetorical attention, or what things call for rhetorical attention and what don't. Which is what an argumentation person from rhetoric would be interested in. So yeah, I think we got that. So he talks about how argument, since it's like this, they have law has come up with rules and things like that. And so all of that is all about the individuals and the rules of all that. So you get that part. Argument's interminable, right? Second limitation of argument as method is that the participants in any one argumentative act can consider but a single pair of alternatives, and these alternatives must be mutually exclusive. So in the second part, which I think we can move through, is kind of a weird point where he says argument as method can only determine issues where there are two options and they're mutually exclusive. We can't do them together. I don't know about that. Do you think that's true? What do you think? What about argument about 3 or 4 or 5 responses? Isn't it the case that television news debates and arguments are limited because they artificially make two sides out of everything? Fox News says the Republicans are making the right decisions here, the Democrats are the bad guys. MSNBC says the Democrats are making the right decision, the Republicans are horrible. Isn't that fake? Aren't they all bad and good? Can't we have 4 or 5 different positions? Can't we have more than 2 parties? Probably. So this kind of thing is a little bit fake. I wonder why he thinks it has to be mutually exclusive. I guess there won't be an argument if there's not a choice, is what he's saying, but you can have a choice between 3 things. I don't know. Maybe if we read the section, it might be good. Oh, here's where he talks about it right here. Argumentative interchanges, which at first appear to be multilateral or unilateral, actually consist of a series of bilateral encounters conducted consecutively. If, for example, this is like from ancient samurai theory too. It's like if you're fighting 10 guys, you're really only fighting 10 different guys in order. You can't fight them all at once. You have to take turns. So it's really just the same as fighting one-on-one. Miyamoto Musashi talked about this in the Book of Five Rings, which is a samurai teaching book that I used to teach argument with. That if you're surrounded by 10 or 20 guys, you're really just fighting them one at a time. Don't think you're fighting 20 guys. You'll lose. But think about each one as they approach you as a separate fight. Maybe that's what Ehninger means here. For example, if friends dispute whether to proceed to a common destination by train or by plane or by car, he who chooses as his cause the claim, we should go by train, must engage the advocates of plane and car separately, so that in reality, there are two arguments centering on the sub-questions, should we go by train or plane, and should we go by train or car? Okay, so he's saying that when you have multiple different perspectives or choices, you can divide it up in these different ways. On the other hand, when an individual debates with himself in an effort to choose between alternative conclusions or courses of action, like me, what am I going to eat? It's my favorite debate to have with myself. He adopts the roles of protagonist and antagonist successively. This is also pointed out by Perlman and Ulbricht-Stidicke in their book, which I don't think was out yet by the time that Ehninger wrote this essay. Third, argument as method is limited because it is extremely verbal phenomenon, a creature imprisoned in the world of words. This is probably the coolest part of this thing. Okay, so nonverbal behaviors of various sorts. This is the coolest part of this section. This is not the coolest part of the essay. Don't misquote me, people. I know you're out there, you people trying to slander me. This is the coolest part of section 3. Okay. Nonverbal behaviors of various sorts, postures, facial expressions, gestures, and the like, may inform, persuade, or command, or they may be offered as responses to informative, persuasive, or interpretive messages. Objects such as guns, clothes, or diamonds may also operate rhetorically, but physical behaviors encountered by physical behaviors result in wars, gang fights, or games, not in arguments. So you can use objects and material things in argument, and they can have influence. Think about someone holding up the murder weapon in front of a jury and saying, with this knife ended the life of the poor victim, the mother of two, and puts it down on the table. It's powerful. But punching someone is not an argument. And a gang fight is not an argument. I mean, I guess an argument could start a gang fight, but it's not an argument. You can't say, oh, look at that argument. It's they're all hitting each other with pipes and knives, and they have the circle of death with the headlights. No. The question, like the negative, must be born of discourse. So without a question to which conflicting answers may be offered verbally, argument cannot exist. So argument is a prisoner of words. It cannot exist in the material world. Although some material objects can be brought in to assist it, it is not a material proposition. So my question to you is, how does this essay interact with Joseph Wenzel's argument about his essay about argument as a product? It's something we make. You know, the ancient Greek word poiesis, making. Does that mean, is argument a material good then? What would Ehninger say about Joseph Wenzel's essay about argument as a product, which is one of the 3 roles argument take? I'd love to get your answer in the comments or in Discord. Because argument is exclusively an affair of discourse, not only is it limited to such dealings as may be carried on among men, but is able to affect the world of not words only through the intervention of man as agent. Sexist language here. For man, we recognize that sexist. It actually should be person. But he was writing at a time when people didn't consider that as a problem when they were writing. So this means that only people can change the world through their actions, not words. But words are the way to get people to change the world through their actions. That's what he means. If he chooses to ignore its lessons, or he misinterprets them, or is unable to devise the machinery necessary to put them into effect, argument is impotent. Moreover, it is the obligation of the disputants themselves to enter into an argument whose facts and experiences of the real world which prevent it from becoming an exercise in futility. So argument can't be based on fantasy or counterfactual reasoning. It has to be based on the real world. It can't be just for fun. We can't have arguments where, like, suppose the sun revolves around the earth. Would we then do these things? No, that's not argument for Ehninger. So we have to be aware of the fact that it's a word-based and word-constricted thing. So if we win an argument, that just means that we have to go and act, is what he's saying. We have to go do something about it. Fourth and last, argument as method is limited by the fact that it is applicable only to the selection of means and never to the determination of the ends towards which these means are directed. Just as every active argument lies within a certain problem or subject matter universe, so also it lies within a certain universe of values. The second universe is defined. What is he talking about? Multiple universes? What happened? Am I drunk? What? Oh, I wish I was drunk. Boy, can you imagine? I don't think I'm going to lecture drunk. Sorry, guys. Defined by a common end or goal at which the disputants aim, and no less than the problem universe to which it is directed, as this end determines the boundaries beyond which the dispute cannot, in reason, wander. So I think what he's saying is that argument has to be limited towards debating means and not the ends. We can't debate future fact, is I think what he's saying here. So it's a certain universe of values in a certain problem, and it's defined by, it's very limited. So it's only limited by what the disputants say the world consists of, really. What they agree are the limits of the argument. It can't be universal in that philosophical sense. If two friends differ on whether they will gain greater satisfaction from dining at restaurant A or restaurant B, Applebee's or Chili's, oh yeah, because the causes, he probably doesn't even know what the hell those are. Because the causes are simple and immediate, the common end at which they aim, that of maximum enjoyment, Applebee's, will exhibit like qualities. When on the other hand, in a dispute concerning political persuasions or social philosophies, the causes are broad and complex and the end aimed at may be remote or abstract. So he's saying that if you're talking about what restaurant to go at, the argument is going to have these simplistic kinds of arguments. It's not going to be universal discussion of what makes what restaurant good. On the other hand, a dispute concerning political persuasions or what a good president should be or what should be the goal or the attitude of the Democrats or the Republicans, that's broad, complex, and the whole thing might be abstract too. It might not be some very clear end that we could all say, okay, that's the end point of argument. So because of this variant, argument is kind of limited. Always, however, some agreed upon end or goal must be present to define and delimit the evaluative ground within which the interchange is to proceed. When such a ground is lacking, argument itself, let alone any hope of resolution or agreement, becomes impossible. The absence of a commonly accepted aim or value is what lies at the root of many of the breakdowns that occur, for example, in negotiations between the communist and Western nations, and what accounts for the well-known futility of most disputes on matters of politics or religion. When disputants hold different values, their claims pass without touching, just as they pass when different subjects are being discussed. Am I wrong here? Is Douglas Ehninger describing the internet? It sounds like an internet debate, doesn't it? What one party says is simply is evaluatively irrelevant to the position of the other. That's so true. That happens on Facebook, on social media all the time, doesn't it? Twitter. You're bringing up your best stuff, but they just don't see the argument the same way you do. There's no agreed upon ground here. There's no agreed upon focus or end point here. So the arguments just pass by each other and everyone thinks they won. This is the internet debate bros. Kind of like this. An examination of the nature of ends or values need not concern us here. Perhaps at the bottom they are matters of feeling, of personal style or taste. The important point is that they lie on a deeper stratum than argument is capable of penetrating. They are something which argument cannot shape or determine, but which it must presuppose, something which any two disputants need to assume and agree upon as a necessary condition of argumentative interchange. So this is like we have to have a lot of agreement before we start to argue on what our aim is in this argument, what we're trying to do, and what we're trying to persuade about. We can't just go into an argument and just hope for the best. Remember, this is a method. It has rules. It has a process that must be followed. That process must be passionately adhered to, or we're not going to know it's not going to be meaningless. Imagine a football game where there's no referee and no rules. How would you know who had won? How would you know which team did better? Or how would you know which team was doing the better job? That's an interest point. This limitation does not mean that argument as method is incapable of dealing with very broad and fundamental questions that cannot, for instance, compare democracy with totalitarianism as forms of government. Democracy versus totalitarianism is really just the Applebee's Chili's debate all over again, by the way. Come at me. Bring it. As forms of government or wisdom-seeking and wealth-seeking as goals of human activity, what it does mean is that argument is incapable of exploring the value frame within which an active argument arising out of these comparisons or out of the conflict between any pair of competing alternatives must in turn be embedded. What? So, Argument can only look at whatever is embedded in the value frame agreed upon. It can't move to the value frame. I think that's what he's saying. Whatever the range of the subject agitated or of the value questioned, a still more embracing value must be an endless regress, provide a common evaluative ground upon which the contending parties may meet to exchange their views. Oh, he's saying argument is infinitely regressive, that we can always move to another place and have the argument. So we have to have some restricting in the parties of how far we're going to go and where we're going to go. We can always move to something else, and then we kind of ruin the argument. At the extreme, this ground may consist of nothing more than a mutual preference for talking it out rather than fighting it out. So that might be the basis, is let's just talk it out here and let's see where it goes. But to explore even these alternatives through argument presupposes an agreement that the first method is preferable to the second. So that's the minimum buy-in, is that you're saying, we're going to argue about this and talk about it. And that's the minimum buy-in. Okay, section 4. And I think this is the last section. Then we'll call it a day. So in section 3, it's like, what are the limits of argumentation? But you notice when he's saying the limits, he's got his thumb on the scale. He's like, yeah, it's limited because it's so awesome. It's limited because it does all this cool stuff. Yeah, I'm limited because, I have to play basketball on a team, Oh, God. I mean, he does point out those limits, but the limits turn into strengths, don't they? Yes, it's true, argument is limited to words, but words are powerful. Words have strength that is unlike anything else. Is it better than all other forms of power? Well, we can have that argument. Probably not. Maybe it's situational, but you can't deny that words have their own sense of power, their own sense of making, their own sense of crafting a word around them. Did I slip and say the word around them? I kind of like that. I'm going to keep that. Having then examined the nature of argument, reviewed the limits within which a method is confined, let's, in concluding our discussion, consider what the uses and values of argument may be. Okay, so this is why argument's good. We take as our premise the commonplace observation that there exists in the world a given fact of experience, an abundance of problem situations call for a choice between mutually exclusive alternatives. Yep, so are we going to vote for Trump? Or are we going to vote for Biden? That's a great example. Are we going to go to Applebee's? Or are we going to go to Chili's? In which facts, as such, either are absent or are not coercively determining. Yeah, both sides in these things have their own facts, I really don't know what the facts to support Chili's would be. I mean, you have the Fiesta Lime Chicken at Applebee's, don't forget. Applebee's did not sponsor this video, by the way. When confronted with a problem situations of the sort, men may arrive at discussions on the basis of chance, or they may rely upon authority, intuition, or argument. Sexist language again. He means people. For at least two reasons, argument is to be preferred to the other possibilities. First, is more reliable than they are, and secondly, is more humane. So it's better than guessing. It's better than figuring out what you hit first, right? Priority bias. And it's also more humane because it allows everyone to speak and everyone to participate. With that, you remember the bi-directionality of it, that it's bilateral. Very important part for Ehninger in his definition of argument. Aside from its obvious superiority over chance, argument is superior to authority, and intuition is a way of arriving at reliable decisions because it is self-regulative, while they are not. Yeah, it's a process. It's a method. It does its own thing. It has its own way of checking itself. What deserves credence? What deserves assent? Don't agree to anything that you wouldn't assent to or that you think has credence or has sufficient evidence. If we run out of evidence, let's pause and go get some more. Irrespective of whatever controls may be placed upon argument from without, inherent in the method itself is that internal check, which William James, the father of American pragmatism, and also, I think some people would say the father of American psychology, Varieties of Religious Experience, one of the very first big psychology books, beautiful book. William James termed the test of enlightened self-interest, the provision that in addition to presenting his own view of the matter, the arguer is required to defend that view against the attacks of an earnest and informed opponent. The test of enlightened self-interest, the idea that I'm so much smarter than everyone else, so I know what's true, but I'm not willing to test that against others, is kind of a contradiction. In order to prove that my idea is best, I'm going to test it against others. And that is going to show that it's best. I am not afraid of challengers is the better view of whether someone has a good position or not. That's what Ehninger is saying. Nor do the parties who contract this mutual examination of their propositions have it otherwise, for as Johnstone has properly pointed out, Unlike those forms of coercion and control, in which effectiveness is enhanced by denying power to others, the potency of argumentative appeals is enhanced by granting to another the same measure of power that one would reserve for himself. Henry John Stone, another famous American philosopher. I think he's American, is he? I think he is. So if you say I'm right about something, John Stone says that you actually gain more proof to your rightness by being willing to say that you have the power to take me down. You have the power to question this view. Do it. So saying this is unquestionable because it's true, or like people say now, vaccines are unquestionable because they're science. That's a good way to lose. Vaccines are highly questionable. We're always researching them all the time, and you should ask questions too, and you should investigate too. That's the way to convince. That's the way to argue. But we don't value this method in contemporary American society. We value the scientific truth, and we think it's going to save us from everything. It's the dumbest approach of all time. That's me editorializing. I'm sorry. But, I mean, it's kind of my class. I should be able to say what I think here and there. But if you disagree, come at me, bro. I'm happy to have the argument. In freely submitting his own view to criticism, the arguer not only earns the right to criticize the view of his opponent, but more importantly, imposes upon his opponent an obligation to observe in the presentation of his case the same standards of adequacy and fairness by which the party would impose upon him. Out of these mutual obligations and opportunities, the self-regulative character of argument is born. So when I enter an argument, it regulates itself because we're all questioning, we're all moving, we're all exchanging information, and we don't move on until something is settled. We have to deal with the arguments presented. We have to deal with the evidence presented. We can't just ignore it. Then we fall out of our ability to get the other person to realize they should change their own mind by assenting to our view. It's kind of beautiful, isn't it? But besides being reliable in a way that authority and intuition are not, argument is also more humane because it elevates and dignifies man. This is the big payoff in Ehninger's essay. If you don't care about anything else, care about this, because this is a grand slam of why argument matters. Argument is also more humane because it elevates and dignifies people, while the alternative methods minimize and degrade them. Decisions arrived at by chance or intuition or by appeal to authority are disrespectful of human beings as rational beings. Wow, so if I don't engage in argument, I'm transforming human nature into a non-rational thing. I'm just going to trick people. People are stupid. I'm just going to trick them into doing what's right. I'm just going to deceive them into doing what's right. You hear people say that just so they can get their way. But you're dehumanizing the entire concept of people by not assuming and starting from the point that people are rational. By contrast, argument is a self-regulative method which promotes reflection, honors those qualities that characterize man at his finest, or people at his finest. I'm sorry. Well, it's Ehninger's fault. He should have said human beings, not man. This is not to deny that argument at times has been misused, that adherence to argument as a way of knowing or choosing without an adequate appreciation of its limitations has resulted in periods when thought stagnated and prejudice ruled. Sounds familiar. Such misuse, however, as Adler reminds us, another famous philosopher, is to be charged not against argument as a method, but rather against those agents who out of ignorance or willfulness have perverted or misapplied it. People who think argument is about finding out the truth. Argument is about hitting people over the head with the bat of science or the bat of facts. People in the public sphere who think that argument is off the table when it comes to scientific information, that you're just supposed to bend to it, curtail to it. This is the kind of the areas where thought stagnates and prejudice rules because nobody wants to submit to a method of evaluating, see what deserves credence and what doesn't. People would rather just be right. I mean, this is powerful stuff. He's basically saying that we're going to end up in kind of, if we don't agree to treating argument as a method and putting it on the pedestal it deserves, we're going to be in an ignorant, fascist kind of state. A perverse state of prejudice and ignorance, because we're not going to be able to have a process to understand what's best or what really deserves our credence and attention. Restricted to the uses for which it is fit and practiced in the spirit of mutual inquiry, which represents its finest tradition, argument, despite its limitations, deserves to stand beside science on the one hand and logic and mathematics on the other as a major instrument for arriving at decisions that are not only reliable, but also humane. It treats humans as they ought to be treated. The normative understanding of humanity as rational, reason-giving, and reason-receiving. Argumentation makes those people real. Investing in that makes it happen. It's powerful. I love it. Finally, and of supreme importance, I'm glad Ehninger waited for the most supreme importance thing here at the end. All the toppings. Because argument is person risking, it is person making. By accepting the risks implicit in an attitude of restrained partisanship, the arguer both bestows personhood on his opponent and gains personhood for himself. What the hell? Do you understand what he's saying here? If I show I'm invested and I want you to change your mind, and I'm like, I want you to change your mind because of reasons that influenced me, and I'm going to let you assent to those and change your own mind. I'm not going to coerce you or force you or guilt you into it. I have created a model of, I'm assuming that you're a full-on, rational, reasonable human being. 100%. And I also am one too, because I'm opening that French door. Is that a French door? The two-sided door? The one that swings both ways like you see in a restaurant? That's what argumentation does. You know, you can, once the door opens, you can be walked through both ways. You also gain human rights. You're a human being, rational, reasonable. You can commit to participating in a method that a salamander or a dog cannot. For to enter upon an argument with a full understanding of the commitments which as a method it entails is to experience that alchemic moment of transformation in which the egocentric gives way to the alter-centric, the self to the other, the alter. The moment when, in the language of Martin Buber, the ich es is replaced by the ich du, the I it. I'm in these stupid people in my way. I got to push them out of the way. They're just things. The I and the it is replaced by the ich and the do, the I and the you, as a full-fledged other, worthy of my speech, worthy of my attention, worthy of my best effort to try to change your mind, because you have a mind that can be changed. That's the ultimate, beautiful view of humanity there. You have a human mind and it can be changed. That's respect. It's awesome. This is my favorite part of the essay. And so, not the section, the whole essay. It's just beautiful. This is beautiful. When the other, no longer regarded as an object to be manipulated, is endowed with those qualities of freedom and responsibility that change the individual as thing into the person as not thing. So this is how we grant personhood to people, is by saying, you can make up your own mind, but I'm going to try to partisanly force you by virtue of morally constructed and intelligent, credence-deserving reasons. I'm going to try to move you to change your mind. I'm never going to force you to do it. I'm never going to push you to do it. I'm never going to trick you to do it. I'm going to do it because I have ultimate respect for you as someone who can change your mind. You're not wrong. You just need correction, right? But this process also is reflexive, for insofar as we treat the other as a person rather than an object, we become persons ourselves. Well, insofar as we fail to do so, our own personhood is to that extent diminished. If we call our opponents idiots, subhuman, monsters, we're doing that to ourselves. This is like in Buddhism when they say when you're angry, it's like you pick a hot stone out of the fire and you walk around looking for your enemy to throw it at while your hand is burning off. You cause harm to yourself by diminishing your political or social opponents in argumentation. You're hurting yourself because you're transforming. You know, Friedrich Nietzsche said it best. If you want to go fight monsters, take great care that you don't become one. Because that's what's going to happen if you're not careful. The attributes of freedom and responsibility that are defining of the person are not absolutes with respect to the other, but are states that are reached only in relationship. Relation, inclusion, experience from the opposite side, the capacity to comprehend the contradiction which opposition entails, these are not merely descriptive of the human condition. They are constitutive of that condition. The I attains to its full potential only when, and only to the extent that it meets the other as a thou. So I can't have a fully formed identity as a person unless I have other interlocutors who are equal with me to exchange with. That's so cool. So I can't even be a big badass unless I have an audience, right? Unless I have others. But the ultimate way to be a human being is that those people also can do what I can do. They can think and reason and change their mind, and they can apprehend evidence and have it influence them, or facts or speech and have it influence them. That's the highest level of humanity. Argument is a way of living through a common experience from the other side as a reciprocal honoring of the person rather than a unilateral exploitation of the biological or economic individual, is therefore a way of gaining freedom and responsibility by granting freedom and responsibility, a way of achieving personhood for oneself by bestowing personhood upon another. So instead of thinking of people as animals or people as a site of wealth or exchange, we think about them as people who are individuals who can think. Doesn't seem too hard, but it's very hard, especially in our political climate. It's very hard to do. Very hard to do. We need Ehninger to come back from the dead and talk to us. I might get my Ouija board out and film that and try to talk to Douglas Ehninger. No, I don't have a Ouija board, but I bet there's one I could download. Henry Johnstone again. Johnstone has remarked that the creature who refuses to argue or to listen to arguments must of necessity remain something less than human. Can't be human unless you participate in argumentation. That's pretty strict. Because man is by nature a social animal. People are by nature social animals. They attain complete humanity only when they enter into such relationships as argument provides. The ultimate justification of argumentation as a method, therefore, lies not in any pragmatic test of results achieved or disasters avoided. Rather, it lies in the fact that by introducing the arguer into a situation of risk in which open-mindedness and tolerance are possible, it paves the way towards personhood for the disputants, and through them, and millions like them, opens up the way to a society in which the values and commitments requisite to personhood may someday replace the exploitation and strife which now separate man from man and nation from nation. Drop the effing mic, Doug. What an ending. Argumentation is going to end exploitation and solve the conflict of nations. This is like biblical stuff. Drop the mic. What a boss. What a champ. My goodness, Douglas Ehninger. Look at that guy. You wouldn't think he's such a badass looking at him, would you? Whew. Man, that's a lot to take in there. Argumentation as a method will solve all exploitation, conflict, if we hold argumentation up. We can avoid this because we'll think of each other as ourselves. We'll think of each other as rational, reasonable people who can change their minds and make the right decision. Now, this definition of argument is tectonic. You don't have to come up with something so big, but it does give you a sense of how much you can do with argument. And it's just a powerful way to think about it. Think about when I choose to argue with someone, I'm choosing to treat them like a human being, regardless of what they might actually be capable of. I'm bestowing human rights to them and human status to them. Even if they might treat me like dirt, I'm doing what I need to do to live my ethic, treat other people well by treating them as thinking people. Well, that's it for Douglas Ehninger and for Argument as a Method. One of my favorite essays to teach, one of my favorite essays in argumentation. Hope you enjoyed this two-part lecture. And if you have any questions, put them in the Discord if you're in the class. Otherwise, put them down below in the comments. If this is the first time watching me talk about argumentation, there's a lot more here on the channel. Like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell if you want to be notified every time I put up a new video. For now, I'll leave you kind of reeling in the beautiful discourse of Douglas Ehninger and thinking about argumentation as a way of conveying humanity to the other people in your life.